Hello, my name is Andy Yergler, and my story starts out when I was a child. Once I got into the middle school years, that is when my life began to change. After a couple of incidents where I was bullied, I had a very low value of how I saw myself. At that point, I decided I was going to make some choices throughout life that were not going to be the best. I went back to school, and word got around school sort of what I did. And instead of being made fun of or stuff like that, people actually thought maybe that was sort of cool. And I believe to this day, those 3 years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, are still the toughest times of about anybody's life. It's easy to get lost. I know in my life, I was in 6th grade when I had 2 incidents that occurred where I was somewhat bullied within about a 90-day period. And I just know it crushed my self-esteem. I had no value. I didn't really rebound from that point. I realized, though, it would never happen again in my life. Regardless of the circumstance, I would stick up for myself. And that's where I became very angry, and I became bitter. And that is where it led to more exploring and wanting to experiment with substances. And by my freshman year, I started experimenting around with marijuana. At this point in my life, I started giving up the sports that I always enjoyed. Academically, I didn't care about grades, I didn't care about school. I just wanted to be a partier. And throughout high school, that is how I formed my identity. That's what I thought my purpose was. I remember graduating from high school thinking that I had no idea of what I wanted to do in life and that it was going to probably be a short life. Once I graduated from high school in 1997, a couple months later, I was living in Fort Wayne, and that is when I was introduced to the drug cocaine. I used that narcotic the first time in my life in July of 1997, and for the next 100 days, those would turn out to be the worst 100 days of my life. I started dealing the drug in order to cover my habit that I was probably consuming close to $700 to $1,000 a week habit right out of high school. And in October of 1997, I was then arrested for dealing cocaine. After going through the court systems, finally in 1998, I was sentenced to a 10-year prison sentence. I was 19 years old. When most of my friends were going off to college, I was headed to a prison in Indiana. Once I was released from prison, I came home and started to go back to work. I ended up enrolling in Indiana Wesleyan University, where I would go on to get my 4-year degree. Things were going really well. I was putting my life back together, and then that's when I decided that I could start drinking and handle that throughout life. I became a full-blown alcoholic, and alcohol took control of my life roughly within a few months of my first drink. In 2010, I was invited with a mentor of mine to go to Haiti on a humanitarian work team to help out with an earthquake that had happened there. I met a gentleman there in 2010 who was sober for 5 years. He and I talked a lot throughout those 10 days, and I decided that that's what I wanted in my life. I just wanted to be sober. I wanted to live sober. I wanted to put this stuff behind me once and for all. From 2010 to 2016, 6 years, he and I would meet, and I would tell him over 200 times during that time that that day was enough. I was done, and I would go back to drinking. Finally, in July of 2016, I took my final drink, and as of the recording, I'm in my 8th year of working on my sobriety, and as of July, I will have 8 years of complete sobriety. So working through trying to get sober, I've turned to religion, I turned to different philosophies, I turned to friends. It just wasn't working. Finally, what I did discover was one day when I said enough was enough, I wanted to drink, I decided to just walk out the house and I went for a run. I probably ran maybe a mile that day, maybe a little further, I'm not for sure how far, but I knew that at the end of that mile, I wanted to die. When I sat down and was just catching my breath, I felt good. Things felt different, and I ended up going that entire day without drinking. And then this began a process that I did on a daily basis where when I wanted to drink or I needed a drink, I would just go out and go for a run. I was also at that time taking my kids to open swims, and I met a lifeguard who told me he could teach me how to swim nonstop, and it was fairly simple. So he told me some methods or some different practices to do, and I started swimming a little bit. And then a few months after I had gone without a drink, I started riding my bike, and I got interested in the sport triathlon. And eventually what I started doing was training for a triathlon, and that consisted of a swim, a bike, and a run all in the same day. And 11 months, my focus was on just getting ready to do a triathlon. I remember doing my first triathlon. It was about 11 months after I had stopped drinking. I had finished that triathlon that day, and I just felt like I had accomplished one of the greatest things ever. But at the same time, I didn't know where I was going to go from there. And I literally had the thought I was going to come back home and go down to our local bar and celebrate and get hammered that night. But then I realized that what I had accomplished up to that point would be thrown away. So how could I keep this going? I decided I was going to do a triathlon in every state by the time I'm 65. That gave me something to work for on a daily basis. The goal was sustainable. It was something that I think can be achieved. And so I just continued to go deeper and deeper into the sport of triathlon, and that's where I've been able to find, maintain, and sustain my sobriety. Nobody ever wakes up in life and thinks, I want to live my life as an addict, or hey, I want to create some serious issues in my life. In my situation with the cocaine, I know that I thought, hey, I'm just going to have a good time, we're going to party. And that first line immediately, it was one of those cases I was addicted. It's one of those things where you don't just start out with a hard drug. The majority of the time it starts out with something small. I remember thinking, cigarettes were bad, well, let's try smoking cigarettes. I started smoking at the age of 12. Today I understand, the youth, vaping is the big thing, and that's one of the first things that people use when they're trying to experiment or cope. And then from there it leads to alcohol. I think one of the reasons that is because alcohol is in the majority of houses. It's easy to get as a kid. Then from there it goes into marijuana. Again, another substance that is easy to get these days. In many states it's legal. As an adult it can be used as recreation. And then it's like, okay, well now the smoking's not working, the drinking, okay, that's getting boring, the THC, what's next? And it just continues to go down the road to where eventually now it's, do I do cocaine? Or do I experiment with meth? What about heroin? What about opiates? Once that stuff enters your system or into your body, it remaps your mind, and then all of a sudden you realize you are no longer in control, and it can create a monster that you never in your life wanted to become. I always tell people, every day is a new day. What happens in the past, it's there, nothing's gonna change it, but today is a brand new day. And in the recovery world, we really teach and we really preach that, just for today. That's the saying. Just for today, I'm gonna stay sober. Just for today. That's all you have to focus on. And sometimes you gotta break it down hour by hour. Sometimes it's minute by minute, and then sometimes it can go second by second. It is achievable, and with help out there, it's definitely achievable.